Okay, good afternoon, and nice to be back here after a while. Like I said, some scheduling problems, but we're ready to go, and we're going to be doing not 1905, although that's an interesting year as well. We're going to be doing 1909, and how some things that happened in 1909, a number of things that happened in 1909, did impact your lives. So I'm working on the 1900s, from 1900 to 1909, and we got 5 minutes.
Yeah, just gotta go ahead and grab this out your way.
Hang on one second here, and we will
We'll start. Out of the way. Excuse me.
Okay, so we start with William Howard Taft. He was inaugurated as President of the United States. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People is formed. Women want to vote. How many in here think that women should be able to vote? Everybody. Now, I spoke about Clara Lemlich. She leads 20,000 women on a strike against the needle trade or the garment industry back in 1909. Immigration to the United States is a major issue. This one would come back to bite the United States in 1979. Anglo-Persian Oil Company forms, and you know them better today as BP, and I'll discuss that at the end. Excuse me?
British Petroleum?
British Petroleum, BP. The assassination of Ito leads to the Japanese invasion of Korea. Construction on a port in Honolulu, or just outside of Honolulu, Pearl Harbor begins in 1909 because the United States wants a port in Hawaii. The 59th Street Bridge is opened, and it's called the Ed Koch Bridge today. And it's certainly, when you go over it thinking of Ed Koch, and I dealt with Ed Koch, you never feel groovy. Remember the song Feeling Groovy? The 59th Street Bridge song? It's now called the Ed Koch Bridge. You can't feel groovy about that. There is a new penny that came out in 1909 with Lincoln's bust on there. The Montreal Canadiens hockey team is formed. How many of you saw Les Mis on Broadway? How many of you seen the film Les Mis? Well, you can see one from 1909. 1909 was the first time that Les Mis ever hit the screens. And did somebody reach the North Pole? Maybe, or maybe not. And was it a white guy, or was it an African American? The evidence points to African American. William Howard Taft wins the 1908 election. The incumbent Theodore Roosevelt said he wasn't running, and Taft wins on November 3rd, 1908. Now, Roosevelt said he was not going to seek a third term, but he persuaded the Republican Party to nominate Taft, who was his close friend and his Secretary of War. The election was really a referendum on whether to continue Theodore Roosevelt's policies. The Democratic Party turned to a two-time nominee, William Jennings Bryan, who was defeated in 1896 and 1900 by the Republican William McKinley. Now, Bryan remained extremely popular among the more liberal and populist elements of the Democratic Party, despite running a vigorous campaign against the nation's business elite. Does that sound familiar? A politician railing against, running for president against business elite?
Who did you have in mind?
Bernie Sanders? Does that sound familiar?
Whatever happened to Bernie?
He's still in Vermont as a senator. Anyway, he ran against the nation's business elite, but Bryant didn't have labor support and suffered the worst loss of the three that he ran. Taft won by a comfortable margin. And there's William Howard Taft, who was the President of the United States, and on his lapel says good times. Bryan campaigned on a progressive platform attacking government by privilege. His campaign slogan, "Shall the people rule?" Taft undercut Bryan's liberal support by accepting some of his revisionist ideas, and Roosevelt had progressive policies that blurred the distinction between the Republicans and the Democrats. And the Republicans also used this rather interesting slogan: vote for Taft now. You can vote for Bryant anytime. Signaling he had lost 2 presidential campaigns and kept running and running and running. Taft easily won. He got more than 50% of the vote, 321 electoral votes. So William Howard Taft inherits this guy, Theodore Roosevelt's mantle. He's a successor, and he is expected to follow all of Roosevelt's policies. And Roosevelt thought that Taft would continue his progressive legacy. However, once Taft was elected, his administration concentrated more on business, they were more business-centric, and limited government for the form of republicanism in direct contact with Roosevelt's progressive vision. There he is. They don't come anymore in a horse-drawn cart or buggy whip, with a buggy whip to the inaugural, but that's how William Howard Taft got to his inaugural on March the 4th, 1909. It was a snowstorm and no cars. Well, there were cars. In fact, Taft actually got cars. But there were no cars really. And he is taken to the Capitol in a horse-drawn carriage. March 4th, temperatures are cold, 10 inches of snow in Washington. The Taft inaugural ceremony was moved into the Senate chamber. Very few people could attend that because it's not outdoors. His inaugural address, Taft, was emphasis on policy, regulation of corporations, tariff reform, strengthening the Army, the Navy, currency laws, the Panama Canal, get that thing done, and labor legislation. But Taft also wants to talk about immigration. And he wants Congress to address the admission of Asiatic immigrants who cannot be amalgamated within our population. In other words, keep all the Chinese out, keep all the Japanese out. That's what we want to do. We do not want those Asians in the country, even though the Chinese built the railroads. Taft was inaugurated. Concerning the U.S. South, Taft is in favor of laws excluding from voting both Negroes and white, not having an education or other qualifications thought to be necessary for a proper electorate. So if you were illiterate, he didn't care who you were. You're not going to vote if you're an illiterate. Taft wants approval for the industrial education of the Negro to make them more useful members of the community. He inherited a country that was having all sorts of problems dealing with its past and civil rights. The Negroes are now Americans. Their ancestors came here years ago against their will, and this is the only country and their only flag. They have shown themselves anxious to live for it and to die for it, in counting the race feeling against them, subjected at times to the cruel injustice growing out of it. They may well have our profound sympathy and aid in the struggle that they are making. This is Great Barrington in Massachusetts, western Massachusetts, part of the Berkshires. And W.E.B. Du Bois was born there, grew up there, and there's a little park showing where his house might have been, where other things might have been on this property, and they have pictures like that of him and talk about his life a little bit. Less than a month prior to Taft's inaugural, February 12th, the date of Abraham Lincoln's 100th birthday, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was established in New York by an interracial group of activists, partially in response to a 1908 Springfield race riot in Illinois. That is what the black neighborhood in Springfield, Illinois looked like once the riot was done. On August 14, 1908, newspapers reported or published reports of a black man's attempted assault of a white woman at her home the night before, and soon afterwards another assault of a white woman by a black man was reported. That got a mob together. They were inflamed and they sought to go get their own brand of justice. However, when the mob was turned away from the jail and could not get to the alleged assailants, you remember in these days, lynching was a sporting event, literally. You know, the word was out, we're going to have a lynching today. 500,000 people, maybe more, attended the lynching. And the cops did nothing about it. Why? Because the cops were probably in on the lynchings. Anyway, so the mob can't get to the jail, so they decide we're going to just find two guys in the community and we're going to lynch them. Scott Burton and William Donegan. Neither had committed a crime. They were quickly lynched. Mob leaders instructed the mob to target the homes and businesses of Springfield's black families, leaving white-owned properties untouched. Black residents attempted to fight in self-defense to protect their property and personhood, only to be brutally attacked and in some cases killed. Over the course of the event, immediately after, nearly 2,000 black residents fled Springfield, Illinois. They never returned. After about 3 days of constant violence, the state militia, the Illinois militia, helped restore order, and approximately 150 participants were arrested. But very few, as was the case in all this stuff going on, whether it was 1904 or the 1890s, very few of the people who were arrested were ever convicted of anything. St. Louis Post-Dispatch, 4 whites, 6 Negroes dead, 70 wounded, Springfield race riots, militia in control. This riot happened at a time of increasing racial unrest in the United States. Lynching was very common. Like I said, it was a sport. People came out to watch it. Other modes of anti-black violence were commonplace, not just in the South of the United States, but across the country. States like Ohio and Illinois and Indiana, 36 or so documented incidences of white mob involving violence. And the cops turned the other way. So did the Justice Department. Well, with that in mind, the NAACP forms, and I have to go up here to really read it, W.E.B. Du Bois, Oswald Vidland, Ida Wells, Henry Moskowitz, and Mary White are the initial founders of the NAACP. Notice it's repressed women, repressed blacks, and repressed Jews. 3 minorities in the country that formed that. So anyways, all these progressives, Mary White Ovington, Henry Moskowitz, William English Walling, Oswald Garrison Villard, along with African Americans, W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Archibald Grimke, and Mary Church Terrell. The Niagara movement was started in 1905 by Du Bois. He goes nowhere. He's up in Niagara Falls, Ontario, and with others, and they're trying to establish a national movement seeking a faster route to civil rights and also racial equality. Now, there are 2 stories about why they were in Niagara Falls. One was they wanted to go to Buffalo, and they were turned away from the hotel in Buffalo, so they went to Niagara Falls. They were turned away because they were blacks. The other was they wanted to go to Buffalo. They went to this hotel, and it was sold out. That's why they ended up in Niagara Falls, Ontario, which is the fun side anyway. Niagara Falls, Ontario. You compare the two, because they're sister cities. But if you compare the two, Niagara Falls, Ontario is fun, whereas Niagara Falls isn't, unless you're on your honeymoon. The Niagara movement set forth a stringent set of policies calling for the immediate and full freedom of speech and press, full suffrage, abolition of discrimination based on race or color, and the belief in universal human brotherhood. The movement was not well received and failed. So 4 years later, people convened and tried to come up with something else. So the Du Bois and the other, Niagara veterans took a new course and came up with the National Organization for the Advancement of Colored People. The NAACP pledged to promote equality of rights and eradicate caste or race prejudice among citizens of the United States, to advance the interest of colored citizens, to secure for them impartial suffrage, and to increase their opportunities for securing justice in the courts, education for their children, employment according to their ability, and complete equality before the law. Like I said, lynching was an event. Check this out. Look at how many people are there waiting for a lynching to take place. I've always said, if they could, pay-per-view in the United States, if they could have an execution of a human being, it would sell 40 million, at least 40 million subscriptions. Nothing changes. Nothing changes. Cairo, Illinois. It's November 11th. Cairo, Illinois. Will Froggy James, an African-American charged with murder of a white woman, Annie Pelly, age 22, was taken from the sheriff's office, custody by a mob, and hanged from an arch at 8th and Commercial Street in front of thousands of cheering spectators at 8 o'clock. They even told you what time to come, 8 o'clock. The rope broke, the men in the mob then riddled James with hundreds of bullets and butchered his body, placing the severed head upon a pole, cutting the rest for souvenirs. For souvenirs, they cut up somebody before burning what remained. Well, that's one problem. Another problem, Saturday Evening Post. Remember the Saturday Evening Post? The Women's Rebellion. And they're talking about how women should keep their mouths shut. Be happy. Why are you revolting? Well, American women wanted the right to vote. After the deaths of Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1902 and Susan B. Anthony in 1906, the women's movement stalled. There are many factions of the suffrage movement, all with varying perspectives. Some of them wanted partial suffrage, like at the local level, basically elect the local councilman. Others believe they must fight for national suffrage. Now, you're William H. Taft, William Howard Taft. You're the new president of the United States. Do you want women to vote, yes or no? What do you think? How many think Taft wanted women to vote, yes or no?
No.
No. Okay. The National Women's Party was often confrontational, organizing protests and marches. The National American Women's Suffrage Association focused on lobbying. Much work was done on the grassroots level, with women holding luncheons, lectures, and letter writing campaigns, traveling to state capitals to make their case. In 4 states, women had the right to vote: Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho, and Utah. There were hardly any people living in any of those places. Regulations protecting women and children were enacted more quickly. These laws raised the age of consent, gave women the right to control their own income and property. Women could not own property, and their income had to go to men, except in the ultra-rich category, and establish free kindergarten. So, like daycare today. Taft once wrote that he opposed suffrage because women were too emotional to vote. Too emotional to vote. Now, Clara Lemlich. That is, it says the Woolworth Street Bank, or rather the 14th Street Bank. They're all on 14th Street, these women. And there are about 2,000 of them. The sign is in Yiddish. It's also in English. Clara Lemlich was a immigrant from Ukraine. She came over when she was 17. She basically didn't know any English. All she knew was Yiddish, but she was living in the right neighborhood, the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Now, the women from the Lower East Side, the teenagers, ones in their early 20s, got jobs. They got jobs in the garment industry. They got jobs in sweatshops. They had enough. And Clara Lemlich, that's Lemlich, would lead the uprising. It's called the Uprising of 20,000. About 20,000 Yiddish-speaking immigrants on November 23rd, most of them young women in their teens, in their 20s, launched an 11-week general strike in New York's shirtwaist industry. They made schmatzes. You know what a schmatze is?
Right.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there was also another strike the women did because they raised the prices of
Of
chicken.
kosher meat in
Yeah.
1902 and 1917. She was involved in the one in 1917, Clara Lemlich. It was called the Uprising of the 20,000. It was the largest strike by women to date in American history. And there she is.
Wow.
That is Clara Lemlich. And she's about 23 years old. And she's the leader of 20,000 women. 20,000 women. Throughout the uprising, arrests and harassments continued unabated. In 1 month, 723 people were arrested, 19 sentenced to the workhouse or jail. Bail averaged $2,500, which would be $86,300 today, per day. Court fines totaled $5,000, which would be $172,600 today. The strike cost about $100,000, $3.4 million today. So this is Clara Lemlich. She's 23 years old. She's a Ukrainian immigrant, and she is the strike leader. She had her ribs broken by cops 6 times, or she had 6 broken ribs, beaten up by cops. Cops beat her up. She was arrested a total of 17 times. She continued and continued and continued. A 10-year-old girl was tried without testimony and sentenced to 5 days in the workhouse for allegedly assaulting a scab. Now, in the Yiddish community, back in 1902 and 1917, a scab could have been somebody having kosher meat in their house, and they would have been outed as a scab. People went from house to house to house to make sure they weren't buying meat because the meat was too expensive. And Clara Lemlich was part of the 1917 kosher meat strike. All of a sudden, the guys in New York said, well, you know what, we'll just send the stuff down to Philadelphia. They'll do it in Philadelphia. We'll just send all the work there. And it was very similar in Philadelphia. A lot of Yiddish-speaking immigrants working in the schmata industry, the shirtwaist industry. And here they are down in Philadelphia, and they're asked, do you want the extra work? They said, no, we're going on strike. Thousands of Jewish women in Philadelphia walked out of their jobs on December 20th to protest unsafe working conditions and exploitations. Here are some of the working conditions. Excuse me?
Is this the time of the triangle shirt?
That would come in 1911. This was 2 years earlier. Fire escapes were locked due to fears of workers stealing fabric. Days could be as long as 14 hours, and the work week was 6 days long. Well, everybody shut down for Shabbos. The guys who ran the place and the workers. So they shut down for Shabbos. Anyway, there were a few sanitary facilities for when the workers needed to relieve themselves. Spaces were crowded, hot in the summer, freezing in the winter. Children as young as 10 years old worked alongside young women in their teens and in their 20s. Something had to give. Garment workers in Philadelphia realized a recent influx of work was due to the factory owners in New York City outsourcing manufacturing in response to a shirtwaist strike there. Workers in Philadelphia said, we're going to join the strike. And they did. New Yorkers told them, or the community in New York said, don't do the shirts, go on strike, join us. They did. Now, the workers received encouragement from what would be considered a highly unlikely source, the daughter of William Howard Taft, Helen Taft. She sent a letter from the president calling for the strike to be settled. Here they are. Here are the picketers. Picket, ladies tailors, and strikers. These are the women who went on strike. Clara Lemlich was the leader. These women had to be really tough women. Really tough women. They were living in horrendous conditions in the tenements, Lower East Side. They were working in horrendous conditions, and yet, guess what? They won. They won. The young strikers' courage tenacity and solidarity forced the predominantly male leadership in the needle trades, as they were called, and the American Federation of Labor to revise their entrenched prejudices against organizing women. After an 11-week work stoppage, the strikers did get a shortened work week. They got increased wages, although the average wage in the United States around then was about 22 cents an hour, which is more than the federal minimum wage today if you adjust it with inflation. They made more money in 1909 than you can in 2024 at 22 cents an hour adjusted for inflation. Anyway, so they get increased wages, an end to charges for supplies, and union recognition. Union recognition. These women were the first women's union ever to be recognized. The strikers transformed the garment industry into one of the best organized trades in the United States. Clara Lemlich was the one. She wasn't finished after 1909. She would get involved in the women's movement for voting, and she's the reason why there's rent control in New York City.
Wow.
Read about her. Well, here's immigrants. These are Italian immigrants. And they survived an earthquake in Italy, came over. More than 1 million immigrants from Italy, Russia, Austria, Hungary entered the United States, accounting for 66% of the legal immigration that year. Many of these immigrants were refugees from the earthquake in Italy. Most passed through Ellis Island on their way to the United States, and it's kind of funny how the Lower East Side set up. East of Forsyth Street, because I grew up there until I was 8, that was the Jewish section. West of Forsyth Street, Christie Street, that way, Mulberry, that was the Italian section. The Feast of San Gennaro was over there. Ferraris is still there, one of the few places that's still there. So that's how the immigration broke down. East of Forsyth, Jews. West of Forsyth, that was the Italians. Norfolk Street, yeah, it's Jewish.
Do you know when the Williamsburg Bridge was built?
Around 1900, 1901.
My grandfather went from Williamsburg to Brooklyn, from Lower East Side
over.
to Williamsburg.
Then he had money. If you went to Williamsburg, you had money.
He was a junk dealer.
Oh, okay. Jerry Stiller is my cousin. Ben Stiller is my cousin. Their father, Bill, was a streetcar conductor.
Oh, maybe he knows the story lot.
Well, maybe. He was a streetcar conductor. He earned enough money to leave the Lower East Side to go to
They come
Williamsburg.
from Norfolk Street.
Norfolk Street, yeah, by Suffolk Street, near Essex Street, off Grand Street, near Orchard Street.
I worked on Grand Street.
Yeah, so,
Seward Park.
yeah, well, Seward High School, right? Who's the most famous alum of Seward High School?
Tony Curtis.
Bernie Schwartz.
Yes, she was the.
Yeah, Tony Curtis. Anyway, by the way, how did immigrants come to this country? Well, it was simple. The United States had trade agreements with other countries, and that allowed the immigrants to come in. No problem until 1924. Immigrants came from Italy and Russia and the Austrian-Hungary Empire. They were poorer and less educated than earlier arrivals from Northern and Western Europe. The religious traditions clashed with with the Protestants of America. Most of the new immigrants settled in cities. Immigrants were becoming more and more of a problem because the so-called true Americans, who really are the Native Americans or the Indians, these aren't the true Americans, but the true Americans who were once immigrants. Taft did not have an immigration policy. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company is formed in 1909. It's a British company. It was formed following the discovery of a large oil field in Persia, now Iran. In 1901, William Knox D'Arcy negotiated a deal with the Shah of Persia, not the Shah of Iran, the Shah of Persia, looking for oil. After about 7 years, D'Arcy's geologists couldn't find any oil, and they were ready to give up. But they struck a gusher, and they went into business. Regrettably into business because of, well, what's going on in the Middle East today. in 2024. Get to that later at the end. But oil. Ito's assassination starts the Japan-Korean conflict. Hirobumi Ito was appointed the head of the Japanese Empire's Residency General in December 1905, taking over the rule of the Korean Empire. Japan, which ousted the Emperor Gojong in 1907 over the Hague Special Envoy incident, dissolved the Korean Empire's army. There was a war of righteous army all over the country, and the Japanese army brutally suppressed them. This intensified anti-Japanese behavior, and this is the guy Ito. On the morning of October 26, Japan is tightening its grip on the Korean peninsula, and the Japanese governor of Korea, Ito, is due to arrive by train at the railroad station in Harbin. Hiding on the platform is a Korean veteran of anti-Japanese struggles, An Jong-un. He tucks himself. Yeah.
An Jong-un.
Okay. He tucks himself into a line of soldiers, stashes his pistol in a lunchbox. When Ito emerges, An steps forward, shoots him dead. That is the assassin who shot him dead. Shortly after the assassination, Korea was annexed by the Empire of Japan with the Japanese goal of wiping out the Korean culture. Are you Korean?
Yes.
You are, so you know all about this.
Yeah, I came originally from North Korea.
North Korea.
Yeah.
What year?
I was 1945.
Oh, so you got out right after the war when
Yeah.
when the Japanese
Yes.
were surrendered and then the fight over who owns Korea,
Yes,
U.S. or
so
Soviets.
it was easy to come down at
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah. An was arrested by Russian guards who held him for 2 days before turning him over to the Japanese colonial authorities. When he heard the news that Ito had died, he made a sign of the cross in gratitude and was quoted as saying, "I ventured to commit a serious crime, offering my life for my country." This is the behavior of a noble-minded patriot. He would be executed for the crime. The assassination exposed the deep-seated resentment and resistance to Japanese rule among the Korean population. The assassination would also mark a turning point in Japan's policy toward Korea, recognizing that its efforts to win the hearts and minds of the Korean people had failed. The Japanese government shifted its focus towards consolidation or consolidating its control over the peninsula through more direct and forceful means. Well, this is John Tyler. He was President of the United States from, say, April 1841 through March 4th, 1845. He still has a grandson who's living. Recently, the other grandson died. Grandson. He had a kid when he was in his 70s, and that kid had a kid who was in their 70s. And so this guy who was the president 180 years ago still has a grandson walking the earth, John Tyler. Beginning in 1842, President John Tyler gave notice to European nations that the United States would never consent to their occupying the Hawaiian Islands. That is the Secretary of State, Daniel Webster. For most of the 1800s, leaders in Washington were concerned that Hawaii might become part of the European nation's empire. During the 1830s, Britain and France forced Hawaii to accept treaties giving them economic privileges. 1842, the Secretary of State, Daniel Webster, sent a letter to Hawaiian agents in Washington affirming U.S. interests in Hawaii and opposing annexation by any other nation. Webster also proposed to Great Britain and France that no nation should seek special privileges or engage in further colonization of the islands. This is what the Americans wanted to do. 1849, the U.S. and Hawaii concluded a treaty of friendship that served as the basis of official relations between the two parties. This is Napoleon III. Can't touch this, Napoleon III. In 1851, when the French were threatening to occupy Hawaii, Daniel Webster, still Secretary of State, wrote, "I hope the French will not take possession of Hawaii. But if they do, they will be dislodged. My advice is taken. If the whole power of the government is required to do it." Webster had a vision. That was his vision. Pearl Harbor. Establish a base, a naval base in Pearl Harbor so the expansionist Americans could start exerting power or their power in Asia. Webster thought Hawaii would be a perfect spot for a naval base to protect American interests in the Pacific, but there was a significant problem. Islands, not American territory, it was the Kingdom of Hawaii. It was a country who had a queen. But there would be a coup in 1893. January 14th, 1893, a group of mostly Euro-American business leaders and residents formed the Committee of Safety. Whose safety? Well, their safety. The pineapple plantation safety. The sugar plantation safety. That's what they want. They have it, but they want more. To stage a coup d'etat against the kingdom and seek annexation by the United States government. The United States government minister John L. Stevens, responding to a request from the Committee of Safety, sent a bunch of Marines there to get rid of the Queen, and we'll take over the palace. And they did. A descendant of the American missionary community to Hawaii was Sanford B. Dole. He was a lawyer, advocated the westernization and destruction of the Hawaiian government and also all Hawaiian culture. After the overthrow of the monarchy, he served as the president of Hawaii until the government secured Hawaii's annexation by the United States. That is not one of the Smith brothers from the cough drops. That is Sanford B. Dole, who had nothing to do with the pineapple people. That was a different family. Dole became the president of the republic when the provisional government of Hawaii ended on July 4th. Notice the date, July 4th, 1894. Controversy ensued. In the following years, the Queen wanted to regain her throne, and the President of the United States, Grover Cleveland, is absolutely useless. Absolutely useless in the whole thing. His administration commissioned the Blount Report, which concluded that the removal of the Queen had been illegal. And the United States demanded that the Queen be reinstated, but the provisional government said, well, you're only Grover Cleveland. Go deal with Baby Ruth. Oh, by the way, the candy bar was named after Baby Ruth, Grover Cleveland's daughter, who might have been illegitimate at first, but he married a woman. So that's where Baby Ruth came from. See, learn something every day. How many of you like the Baby Ruth candy bar? It's named after Grover Cleveland's kid. Anyway, this is the palace, and if you know this, most of these people are white. They're not Hawaiian, who are in front of the building. Loren A. Thurston declined the presidency of the Republic. Dole was chosen to lead the government instead. Dole would be the first and only president of the Hawaiian Republic from 1884 to 1898. Now, basically, his job was to convince William McKinley, annex us, so we don't have to pay any tariffs on sugar anymore. So we don't have to pay any tariffs on pineapples anymore. It's financial. It was all financial. Dole, in turn, appointed Thurston to lead a lobbying effort in Washington, D.C. and secure Hawaii's annexation. Dole was successful as a diplomat. Every nation that recognized the Kingdom of Hawaii recognized the Republic. This is my son when he was looking at schools back in 2002, 2003, standing in front of the McKinley statue in Buffalo, New York. McKinley, the president, was open to persuasion by U.S. expansionists and annexationists from Hawaii. He met with three of them from Hawaii: Thurston, Francis March Hatch, and William Ansel Kinney. After negotiations in June 1897, Secretary of State John Sherman agreed to a treaty annexation with representatives from the Hawaii Republic. The Newlands Resolution was used to annex the Republic to the U.S. It became the territory of Hawaii. The Newlands Resolution was passed by the House on June 15, 1898, 209 to 91, and by the Senate on July 6, 4221. And McKinley said, let's make it official. Why don't you both do it? And the House and Senate, and they do, on August 12, 1898, and Hawaii becomes a U.S. territory. So this is what they wanted. Pearl Harbor. Well, not exactly Pearl Harbor the way, in the shape that it was when America annexed Hawaii. It had some work to do on it. In 1908, Congress approved an appropriation of about $3 million, $2.5 million today to straighten the canal and establish a naval station at Pearl Harbor. The U.S. viewed Hawaii as an important strategic military outpost for a better part of 6 decades. Now the United States had the territory and could build the naval station. Ironically enough, the reason that the Americans wanted the base at Pearl Harbor was to stop Japanese expansion in the Pacific. Work on the dock started on September 21st. On November 11th, Taft announced that Pearl Harbor shall be the key to the Pacific, the radio point for offensive and defense of the United States operations in the East. Pearl Harbor would be the nation's new and striking move on the international chessboard, giving the United States domination of the Pacific Ocean. Is there some irony in all that? A lot of irony. Flexing America's military muscle, Nigeria. Now, America became an expansionist country in 1898.
You said Nigeria.
Rather, Nicaragua, I'm sorry, Nicaragua. Nicaragua. Anyway, the United States in 1898, they go to war with Spain and end up with Guam and Cuba and Puerto Rico, along with Philippines. They have knocked off Hawaii. All of a sudden, the United States is a colonial power. And they are flexing their muscle in the Latin American area of the West. November 18th, Taft sends warships to let the elected government of Nicaraguan President Jose Santos Zelaya know that he's upset. Taft's administration had close relations with U.S. corporations operating in Nigeria, and the heads of the corporations were not pleased with Zelaya. It seems Zelaya thought his people's property was more important than the interests of corporations doing business in Nicaragua. That would be a repeated theme, and it starts here. Zelaya and the Liberal Party faced opposition from the Conservative Party, led by the Governor Juan Jose Estrada of Bluefields, who received support from the U.S. government as a result of American entrepreneurs providing financial assistance to Estrada's rebellion in the hopes of gaining economic concessions after the rebellion's victory. Zelaya, his aggressive stance toward what he seemed as rebels, including the execution of 2 American citizens, and he makes his big mistake, killing 2 Americans, significantly escalated tensions. These executions were viewed as a serious provocation by the United States. In response, the United States government took decisive action against Zelaya, culminating in military intervention. Here we go, the rout of the Army complete, the Evening Tribune, and America has control of Nicaragua. Zelaya resigned on December 14th. His hand-picked successor, Jose Madriz, was elected by unanimous vote of the liberal Nicaraguan National Assembly on December 20th. But it wasn't enough for the United States. The U.S. Secretary of State, Philander C. Knox, his name was Philander, he was in Washington, said that the United States would not resume diplomatic relations with Nicaragua until Madriz demonstrated that it was a responsible government, prepared to make reparations for the wrongs done to American citizens. Zelaya's request for asylum was granted by Mexico. He leaves on the Mexican gunboat called the General Guerrero, and he heads off for Corinto, and for the south, for the Selenian Cruise, Mexico, or for Selenian Cruise, Mexico, on the night of December 23rd. This would begin the United States' watchful eye over Nicaragua. So how many of you have been over that bridge? 59th Street Bridge. Anybody here from Queens? Nobody's here from Queens? Oh, okay. Well, the reason I ask is I spent 4 years of my childhood in Queens, And we always referred to Manhattan as the city.
Yeah.
It was the city.
Yeah,
If you were in Brooklyn, what they call it.
In Bronx, we used to call it the city.
Yeah, the city is Manhattan. Even though it is the Bronx, and Brooklyn, and Queens, and even Staten Island. So this is the Queensboro or 59th Street Bridge. And it goes from 59th Street on the Manhattan side and right into Queens. And you get over to Northern Boulevard, Queens Boulevard right over there. They've really built up that area. That area is now totally built up. And of course, when you build up an area and you forget about traffic, it causes major traffic jams. And that's the Queensboro Bridge. We're feeling groovy, the 59th Street Bridge. The Queensboro Bridge, or the 59th Street Bridge between Queens and Manhattan, was the largest and heaviest cantilever tusk bridge in the United States when it was completed. It opened on June 12th,
In what year?
1909.
Thank you.
If you have the Lincoln penny from 1909 in your pocket, you have a pretty penny. Theodore Roosevelt thought that American coins were common and uninspiring. He didn't really like Native Americans, and he had the buffalo head nickel, right? So he wasn't too thrilled with that and other things on American coinage. So he had the opportunity to pose for a portrait with Victor David Brenner of the Lower East Side. The artist had become one of the nation's premier medalists. Roosevelt had learned of Brenner's talent in a settlement house on the Lower East Side and was immediately impressed with a bas-relief that Brenner had made of Abraham Lincoln based on a Matthew Brady photo. So Roosevelt orders the new Lincoln cent to be based on Brenner's work and to be released just in time to commemorate Lincoln's 100th birthday, February 12, 1909. The coin was finally released to the public on August 2nd with much fanfare. People got in long lines and wanted to get the pennies. Because of the penny's portrayal of Lincoln, many black Americans considered it emancipation money. There is a feature on those pennies, VBD, the artist's initials that went out. It's the only coin that ever had the artist's initials on it. On August 6th, the Washington Post proclaimed the VBD cent doomed. The initials and their placement on the coin met with displeasure from the Secretary of Treasury, Franklin McVeigh, who had either not seen the coin's design or did not look at it closely before the minting began. On November 2nd, the U.S. Treasury announced that all VBD Lincoln coins had passed into public hands. Brenner's initials were removed from the dies, and the coins with the initials became collector's items. I don't know if any of you are hockey fans here, but the oldest continuing National Hockey League team, the Montreal Canadiens, started in 1909, founded on December 2nd. The National Hockey Association of Canada is the housing organization. The league was formed in response to the formation of the Canadian Hockey Association, a league that did not want to include the Montreal Wanderers franchise because of an inadequate arena. A second team from Montreal was admitted to the league to spark interest among French-speaking fans, the Canadian, or the club, the Hockey Canadian. The CHA folded within 2 weeks, and then a third Montreal team called the Shamrocks joined the NHA. So, how many of you read the book Les Miserables? Les Mis. You read the book. How many of you seen the movie? How many have seen the play? How many of you seen the 1909 movie? You have seen the 1909 movie. The silent movie. It was in 4 parts. It was in 4 parts. Les Mis was an American silent historic drama prototype feature film. 4 short films that could be seen separately as a series, but combined, it's a full-length film. It was released on September 4th. The prototype feature movie is based on the 1862 French novel by the same name by Victor Hugo. Stars Maurice Costello and William V. Renius. It was directed by J. Stuart Blackton. It is the story of Jean Valjean, Valjean, I was thinking of Saint Laurent for some reason. It cost 7 cents to see the movie, $2.42 today. It was distributed by the Vitagraph Company of America. So who was the first man to reach the North Pole? It's a good question. Even 115 years later, hasn't been answered. Somebody got there. Somebody got there. The explorers Robert E. Peary and Matthew A. Henson claimed they were the first men to reach the North Pole. April 6th, they established Camp Jessup, allegedly within 5 miles of the pole. On April 7th, Peary's group started their return journey, reaching Cape Columbia on April 23rd. They boarded the ship, the Roosevelt, on April 26th. Upon returning to civilization, Peary learned that Dr. Frederick A. Cook, a surgeon and an ethnographer on the Peary expedition of Greenland, 1891, 1892, claimed that he reached the North Pole in 1908. Despite remaining doubts, a committee of the National Geographic Society, as well as Naval Affairs Subcommittee of the U.S. House of Representatives, credited Peary with reaching the North Pole. That is Dr. Cook. In December, after reviewing Cook's limited records, a commission of the University of Copenhagen ruled his claim unproven. But there was no certain answer. Well, there's Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. There's William Howard Taft. They were both president in 1909. William Howard Taft and Theodore Roosevelt became friends around 1890. Taft was the Solicitor General, and Roosevelt was a member of the United States Civil Service Commission. 1904, Roosevelt made him Secretary of War, and he became Roosevelt's hand-picked successor. Despite his personal ambition to become the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, Taft declined repeated offers of appointment to the court, believing his political work was more important. By 1907, Roosevelt decided that Taft should be his successor. The Republican convention nominated him for president in 1908. But Taft would alienate many liberal Republicans who later formed the Progressive Party by defending the 1909 Payne-Aldrich Act, which unexpectedly continued high tariff rates. He also fired Gifford Pinchot, the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service. He was a Roosevelt advisor, conservationist. He was fired for insubordination. Roosevelt was fuming and decided to run for president in 1912. In 1912, when the Republicans renominated Taft, an angry Roosevelt bolted the party to lead the Progressive Party, thus guaranteeing the election of Woodrow Wilson. That is Chief Justice William Howard Taft. In 1921, the President Warren G. Harding called upon Taft for one final appointment, the position that Taft always dreamt about, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. I don't remember that I was president. Taft would hold this position from 1921 until his death in 1930. He also argued for the creation of a new building to house the Supreme Court. In 1929, he would not live to see it. He is the only man or person in the United States who have been President and Chief Justice of the United States. Well, Clara Lemlich, this is another protest. Saturday, September 16th, Cooper Union, women's right to vote, and Clara Lemlich was part of that group. Yeah, you're waving your hand.
Yeah, a lot of the streets on the Lower East Side are named after Susan Anthony. A lot of the streets are named after.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, anyway, this is another thing she was involved with. She focused on the suffrage movement, organized housewives around food boycotts until the 1970 kosher meat boycott. And they used to go from house to house, open the refrigerator, or it wasn't the refrigerator, open the icebox to see what meat was there. And if you had kosher meat, you were scabbed and you were excommunicated. They didn't want any part of you anymore. Not at all, because you went against what they were doing. You were helping, Yossi with his fat thumb on the scale. My mother-in-law always accused kosher butchers, of having fat thumbs and laying on the scale. She must have learned it. She was born in 1921. She must have learned it from those days. In 1929, she helped found what would later become the Progressive Women's Councils, organizing women around rent strikes and food boycotts during the Great Depression. Clara Lemlich continued her activism into her final years, helping orderlies at her nursing home organize a union. She was like you. She was in senior residence, and she's organizing the workers till she died. Most women didn't get the right to vote because of a constitutional amendment in 1920. Not all American women got the right to vote in 1920. In 1920, Native Americans were not allowed to be United States citizens, so the federal amendment did not give them the right to vote. With the passage of the Snyder Act in 1924, American-born Native women gained citizenship. As late as 1962, individual states still prevented some women from voting by the use of literacy taxes. 60 years ago, literacy taxes, poll taxes, and claims that residents of the reservation meant one wasn't a resident of the state. Native-born Asian Americans already had U.S. citizenship, but the first generation of Asian Americans did not. Asian American immigrant women were therefore excluded from voting until the Immigration Nationality Act of 1952, which allowed them to gain citizenship more than 3 decades after the 19th Amendment was passed. The poll tax was eliminated 60 years ago. Lynching. That's Emmett Till over there. Congress finally got around to making lynching a federal hate crime. March 29, 2022, President Joe Biden signed the bill into law making lynching a federal hate crime, more than 100 years after the legislation was first proposed. House of Representatives approved the bill 422-3 on March 7, 2022, with 8 voters not voting. It cleared the Senate by unanimous consent. The 3 House Republicans who voted against the Emmett Till law: Thomas Massey of Kentucky, Chip Roy of Texas, Andrew Clyde of Georgia. Ellis Island. How many of you been to Ellis Island? Ellis Island. The Immigration Act of 1917, the Barred Zone Act, is best known for the creation of a barred zone extending from the Middle East to Southeast Asia, from which no persons were allowed to enter the United States. That meant no Chinese, no Koreans, no Japanese, no Thais, no Indians, nothing. The United States, anyway, no persons were allowed to enter the United States. Its main restriction consisted of literacy tests, which was supposed to reduce European immigration. But Jews got around it. So you had to know about 40 or 50 basic words of your language to prove that you were totally not illiterate. And Jews studied Torah. And because they studied Torah, they knew the words. They got in. The Emergency Quota Act in 1921 was enacted because of fears of increased immigration after the end of World War I, and the spread of radicalism propelled Congress to enact this emergency measure, imposing drastic quantitative caps on immigration. The Immigration Act of 1924, the Reed-Johnson Act, was enacted to further limit immigration. This law, this is the mother of all immigration laws. This law established extended national origin quotas, a highly restrictive and quantitative discrimination system. It also created the words undocumented, or the word undocumented. Never used before 1924, but I gotta give you the 1924 talk to fully explain what went on. Quota system would remain the primary means of determining immigrants' admissibility to the United States until 1965. In 1930 and 31, the Canadian government responded to the Great Depression by applying severe restrictions to entry. New rules limited immigration to British and American soldiers or agriculturists or those with money, certain classes of workers, immediate family of Canadian residents. I am going to name you some people whose families probably couldn't get into the United States or Canada after 1931. Anybody ever watch Let's Make a Deal with Moish Halperin? You mean Monty Hall? Watch that? William Shatner, Lauren Green, David Steinberg. Those are four prominent people. There are also Zeller's department stores, Steinberg's department stores up in Canada as well.
They have to get a letter, says the volume,
Yeah,
letter, and
Yeah.
it's very sad,
yeah.
they didn't have the letters. But
Yeah. 1909 legacy. 1979, Tehran, Iran. The oil company became known eventually as BP, British Petroleum. March 1951, Mohammad Mogadek presents the idea of nationalization of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company to the Iranian Parliament, and eventually is approved by the Iranian Parliament. Mossadegh is elected as Iran's new prime minister in April of '51. In 1953, the American CIA, led by Teddy Roosevelt's grandson, Kerman, and the British Secret Intelligence Service funded and led a covert operation to depose the prime minister with the help of military forces disloyal to the government and installed the Shah. That happens on August 19th. In 1979, Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran, took hostages as a hostile government to the United States is now in place. The Iranians, actually for two reasons, never forgave the Americans. One was the Americans overthrew the legitimate elected government, installed the Shah, and then when the Shah was dying, America brought him in. And those two events have created what you see today with the tensions between Iran and the United States. That's the Enola Gay. That was the plane that dropped the little boy bomb on Nagasaki, Hiroshima rather. On August 22nd, 1910, Japan annexed Korea as a result of the Japan-Korea Treaty of 1910. Japan set up a government in Korea with the governor generalship filled by generals or admirals approved by the Japanese emperor. Koreans were deprived of freedom of assembly, association, press, and speech. Many private schools were closed because they did not meet certain arbitrary standards. Japan's occupation of the Korean peninsula ended with the Japanese, or with Japan surrendering to the Americans on September 2nd, 1945, following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. America has been at war with North Korea since 1950, and the war still goes on. Only a truce was signed in 1953. That's Pearl Harbor. It was built to stop Japanese expansionism. The United States built that naval base at Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, Japan began an attack on Pearl Harbor that commenced at 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time, 12:48 New York time. The base was attacked by 353 Imperial Japanese fighter planes, bombers, torpedo planes, 2 waves, launched from 6 aircraft carriers. All 8 U.S. naval battleships were damaged, with 4 sunk. The Imperial Japanese Navy also bombed other locations that day, including in Guam, Philippines, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaya, Midway Island, and Wake Island. The United States declared war on Japan December 8, 1948. Nicaragua. In 1912, the United States intervened in Nicaragua with a large force and put down a revolution. And from that time until 1925, a guard of American Marines was kept in the country to protect American lives and properties. There was another occupation of Nicaragua, 1927 to 1933. The U.S. and Nicaragua have had an international relationship, but it is at best uneasy. In January 2024, the United States State Department issued a warning not to go to Nicaragua due to arbitrary enforcement of laws, the risk of wrongful detention, and limited health care availability. The State Department told Americans to exercise increased caution in Nicaragua due to crime. Liberace,
Uh-huh.
and he's on the show on TV. And the song he is singing is, slow down, you move too fast. Got to make the morning last, kicking down the cobblestones. Nothing to do, feeling groovy. Liberace, who felt groovy a lot in his life. The Queensboro Bridge, or the 59th Street Bridge, is now called the Ed Koch Bridge. Ed Koch once told me there were two types of people in life. One who gets ulcers and one who gives ulcers.
Gave.
He gave ulcers. That bridge has appeared in numerous media works, including films and TV shows set in New York City. New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg renamed the bridge in 2011. The title of Simon Garfunkel's 1966 song, the 59th Street Bridge song, Feeling Groovy, refers to the Queensboro Bridge. And it was mentioned in F. Scott Fitzgerald's 1925 novel, The Great Gatsby. The bridge has been the setting of film locations for movies such as Manhattan in 1979, Spider-Man in 2002, and The Dark Knight Rises in 2012. Paul Simon wrote the song. Paul Simon hates the song. It's made him a lot of money, but he hates the song. The VBD in the penny. The Lincoln penny replaced the Indian head penny and was the first everyday U.S. coin to feature an actual person. But it was immediately met with controversy over the inclusion of the initials of the sculptor who designed the coin, Victor David Brenner, on the reverse. Philadelphia Mint came up with or produced 27,995,000 BBD coins. San Francisco Mint, though, only 484,000 coins, so it was rare. The U.S. Coin Book estimated value of the 1909 S Lincoln Wheat Penny BBD variety is worth $868 in average condition, and anywhere between $1,900 and $2,332 in a more in uncirculated MS Mint conditions. My daughter in the Stanley Cup in 1983, we plopped her into the Stanley Cup. The owner of the Toronto's, Eddie Livingston, was displeased with his treatment. He sued the National Hockey Association. In November 1917, the National Hockey League was formed as 4 former NAH members, the Montreal Canadiens, the Montreal Wanderers, the Ottawa Senators, and Quebec Bulldogs ownership voted to join the league. The Montreal Canadiens franchise won 23 Stanley Cups in the NHL, 24 altogether. The National Hockey League now has 32 franchises. Les Mis. Victor Hugo's novel has been the subject of many adaptations in various media since its original publication in 1892. The novel has been reworked in other books. It's been the subject of plays, TV shows, radio shows, comic books, and video games. Henson may have been the first guy to be on the North Pole, or to reach the North Pole. African American, may have been. Matthew Henson may have been the first man, black or white, to reach the North Pole as part of Robert E. Peary's team. Some members of Congress tried in 1914 and 1915 to reopen the question of who discovered the North Pole, but their efforts faded with the approach of World War I. The first undisputed overland trek to the North Pole was in 1968 when a party led by Ralph Plester arrived by snowmobile. Other explorers preceded Plested, arriving by air and by sea, and they confirmed Cook's original description of the Polar Sea, ice islands, and westward drift of polar ice. So how did Cook get so much of it right if he did not get to the North Pole in 1908? It's a question that hasn't been answered. It's time for you to talk. Any questions, any comments? It's you.